Hello, and welcome to Clear on Life. In this episode, I interview Jane Weintraub. Jane works as a coach with a focus on the right career fit as an extension of meaning and purpose in life. This interview is full of insights, including the role of a coach in one's life and career and how to find a good coach. Enjoy. Thank you for taking time to be here.
Oh, my pleasure.
I have so many questions for you.
Good.
So you're a coach, and I'm sure people come to you with this very obvious question. What am I supposed to do with my life?
Yeah, that is like
Help
the question.
me, please.
The great existential question of our modern times, at least one of them for sure. Yeah.
And so if someone just shows up that way at your steps, what do you do?
That's a great question because it helps me stay like really practical rather than getting abstracted into describing what I do. So there's actually a process that I use at this point. The first piece involves a pretty rigorous intake session that includes not only an interview, but also a lot of assessment taking.
So is that also, if someone just if I'm going out there and looking for a coach to help me out with my existential crisis, and they straight away give me an answer, is that a red flag?
Well, sure, it is, but most of them won't do that.
Okay.
Yeah. But they will have probably very different approaches than I have to that question, right? Because that question can be handled myriad different ways. Like one can be a total exploration of process and embodiment and psychology and spirituality. And for me, it's like, let's get as actionable and practical as we can possibly through the process of enhancing what you know about yourself already.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what is a coach in your world?
And the best of times, a coach is a facilitator with a light touch that actually can provide the space for the coachee to explore and inquire and move forward with what they're trying to move forward with in their life. Coaches can sometimes be guides, sometimes be advisors, but the role really is to keep the locus of power and action in the hand of the participant, right? The coach is not in the driver's seat.
So this is very different from a teacher, it seems like.
Yeah, it is a really different role than a teacher. I mean, a teacher is describing a territory, might be abstracting, is pointing out, is providing a point of view and a perspective. Coaches certainly have all those facets, but they hold them probably more lightly, or, I certainly hold them more lightly. Yeah.
Gotcha. Like for the most part, the last few years, I've had this existential crisis. I didn't even know I needed a coach. Like there was nothing that was telling me I should go find a coach.
Right.
I was checking out YouTube videos on how to be awesome. That didn't really work. Or read like a bunch of books, self-help books.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was nothing in my reality that was like, a coach is a good thing and you should have that. The closest I got was go find a therapist. Is there any overlap between therapist, coach?
Yeah, there is. I want to first address the previous part of what you said, which is there's that trouble we have with not recognizing the water that we swim in. Like we can't actually always see ourselves outside of ourselves, so it would be hard to know if we needed help with resolving something. And I would say that probably there's some internal knowing that happens when we are almost at a little bit of a crisis point where we're just not moving forward or moving backwards. That stasis might be that we need that stasis discharge, like we might need it chi moved in acupuncture, for example. Like that might be the knowing that something was stuck. So that would be an indicator. And then what was your other question? I already forgot. What was the primary question there?
It's basically, I didn't know what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Right. That was like the big thing is I didn't even know I needed a coach.
Yeah.
There was no vocabulary in my life or my culture. around that.
Yeah.
So that to me seems like a huge barrier. There might be other people like that too out there.
Yeah, coaching has become more popular and more mainstreamed, and it seems like more people are engaging with coaching, like if they're trying to reach a goal, certainly in the sort of the space of physiology, certainly you asked me about therapy, right? Therapy, if there's actually something, metabolic or chemical happening, you would need to see an MD or someone who can prescribe medications. But I actually like this metaphor, this abstraction about chi and moving chi. Like when the chi is stuck, like how is the chi stuck might be the good question to ask of what would be the thing to help resolve it. And it might take a bunch of things. It might actually be working with an acupuncturist or a network chiropractor or coach, right? So story, if we're involved in a narrative about ourselves or archetypal hero's journey about ourselves, that's the space to get a coach involved, which is why this question of what am I going to do with my life, like that's the sort of standard like hero's journey question, like how am I going to fulfill my purpose? What is my purpose? That's the perfect territory for coaching.
So then this metaphor of you don't know the water you're swimming in,
Mm-hmm.
that sounds perfect because a coach, it seems like, would come in and actually point out what you're swimming in.
They would actually do two things. We had talked about another metaphor, this idea of someone stepping into your mandala. So someone getting into your water. Like for me, when I am working with someone, I want to get into their narrative. Like I actually want to step into that water with them and understand what it's like from the inside out. Like what's it actually like to be that human being? As best as I can, obviously, without being caught in the veil of projection. But like really ask enough questions and have enough sense of that human being's perspective and experience that I can actually look out through their eyes in order to make more meaning and more sense of things.
So that's parts of the assessment phase.
For me, that's part of the assessment phase because there's so much that gets revealed in how somebody understands themselves, and that becomes data for me.
And so what are you doing in this assessment phase? Are you interviewing them, talking to them? Are there any tests of any sort?
So I'm interviewing them around their motivation. I'm interviewing them around a bunch of different integral facets that are happening for them. I'm listening to them in developmental style and level. I'm listening to them in story and belief system. And then they're taking a lot of different actual tools. They're using a lot of modalities and assessments. And I take all of that information, and what reveals itself, it's like being an art curator, is like I begin to see this future version of this person, like the current version, but I can also start to see the future embodiment of that person because they've given me all of this information. They revealed so much about how they understand themselves to be. And that's what's important here.
Got it. So you're, I'm going to try to repeat after you so
Sure.
I truly get it too.
Sure.
And so you're sussing out this person, you're looking at their world, you're looking at how their narrative is, and you're doing these tests, and there's various different areas like adult development and what else is there?
Myers-Briggs and Enneagram.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So these are standardized tests out there for typing people?
For typing people.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And so the reason you type people is so that and actually when you type people, is it ever that they've typed themselves before and what you come up with is different from what they thought they were in the
That
past?
happens with Enneagrams most specifically, and it's only because rather than them coming just from the perspective of typing, we're now looking at their motivation around their actions, which can sometimes be people can be blind to, right? So that's the reason why an Enneagram type would change, because somebody would be so close to the water that they're swimming in that they would have identified with one based on topical personality stuff, and once I listen in, I hear motivation placing them somewhere differently. The thing that's important about how I use these assessments is not it's not Jane sitting over here saying you are like this. Like this, I want to be really clear about that, because that's how I think that personality assessments get misused. What it is that somebody else is saying to me, I believe this is how I am.
I believe. So someone else is pointing to me. If I got a coach, let's say if I got you as a coach and you've done the intake, and then you're telling me that you...
No, you would be telling me. You would have taken all these assessments and you would be saying, Jane, look, this is who I am. Oh, look, this is who I am. Oh, look, this is who I am. And really the important word is, this is who I believe I am. Like, this is the narrative and belief system that I hold about myself. This is the story I hold about myself. Like, you would have, through these assessments, basically told me the story of you.
Right. And how important is that I believe that this is who I am versus like just taking a test and it puts me in a category?
Well, it's like super important because it is your belief, right? So it's the way one inhabits the world is based on their belief about the world and about themselves.
And you take that into account into...
That's probably the most important piece, right? So in my kind of coaching, I'm listening for what they believe themselves to be, right? We know that with the narrative self, it is just belief systems based on our programming, our habits, our conditioning, all of that. But that belief is the fuel that drives the directionality of the response to that question of what am I going to do with my life? Like, they've already actually answered the question in their belief system.
Oh, I see. Okay. So the answer is in how I see myself.
Absolutely.
So in some ways you're kind of reflecting and pointing to what's already there.
I like to call it curating.
Curating.
Yes. Yeah.
Got it. And so because I've had this idea that I'll go to a coach and they'll discover something that I've never known and it's just a whole new thing, and then my life's going to be completely different and separate from this miserable thing that I've existed in so far.
It may feel like that, right? Because you're too close to it. It may feel like that. And there is coaching where you can actually work on changing certain neural pathways and habits and patterns of how you've been. But with this particular kind of coaching that I'm interested in, you're actually just revealing to yourself who you believe yourself to be, and then we just go ahead and enhance that and make that bigger in the world.
I see. Got it. What kind of coaching is this?
I mean, I call it career coaching.
Career coaching.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll just leave it at that.
Completely, like, does not,
pretty bland and not sexy.
Yeah, it's just takes away from the depth that you just described of what you're doing. Yeah.
Well, that's why I think it works so well, because it literally is listening into the beliefs a person has about themselves, listening and how that is reflected in personality and action and all of that stuff.
And what if a person believes they are a loser and they are just meant for a dead-end job and maybe nothing great?
So this is why we work with personality assessment, because that's a great question, because we can override a lot of those that level of belief in the personality system assessments. That we'll come back to that, but in the personality assessments, we're getting archetypal models. So like there might be an archetypal model of a type, like say some of the qualities of the Enneagram 6, who tend to be more fearful. So that can be, metabolized in their story about themselves as like, I'm scared of everything, I'm never going to achieve anything, perhaps. But as an archetype, we're not actually capturing that data up front. What we're capturing is this whole gestalt of the story of the Enneagram 6. Does that make sense? Was that clear?
So this narrative that I'm a loser, I'm not going to amount to anything, is a small subset of the archetype. So you're taking this, mapping it to an archetype and saying there's more to it than just that. Is that
exactly? And if we're like, I'm a loser, I'm not going to account for anything, that's a little bit more psychological.
Mm-hmm.
And that is different than hanging out sort of in the mytho-poetic or archetypal realm. Like it may be a belief that they have about themselves, and it may have to be addressed, certainly in the coaching. But we find there are different ways of being with it, right? There are different ways. There are ways of actually retelling that story, where it can be extracted from conflations with culture. Like I'm unworthy, I'm never going to account for anything, could actually be in relationship to the culture in which they live, where everybody is super productive, and in their life they're not productive. Well, there could be something else happening there, that the person could be incredibly sensitive and thoughtful and deep and slow and engaging with their sensations in a totally different way, but they can't see that, but it's still revealed in that statement, because that statement is just saying, I'm not like everybody else in the culture who's fast and achieving a lot.
I see. So I'm a loser, I'm not worth anything, could really be, I'm just very different from what else is happening in my culture, and I have all of these other amazing gifts, but I just never see it without the help of a coach in this case.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I so want to say a little bit more about that, because it's such a great question. Inside of every archetypal model, there's like built in like a little hero's journey, like the thing that gets transformed. And a lot of that is at the level of belief system. So like that statement of I'm unworthy might live in an archetypal model and find resolution through mythology rather than psychology. Through a new kind of storytelling.
Seems like there's a lot about stories here.
Well, sure. I mean, like, there's a great book, The World is Made of Stories. Like, we are a storytelling creature. We live in story.
So what I believe about myself is a story.
What you believe about yourself is a story.
And you as a coach come in to re-architect that story in some ways?
No, to curate that story in a means that is going to let you exploit it to the best of your ability in the way that it was meant to be exploited, so that it is that you can be the most unique snowflake that you are. And that you're not enmeshed or chained by the constraints of a culture that says you can't be like that, for example.
And this idea of becoming more of who you are.
Yes.
I mean, it sounds like in this case, without derailing the conversation too much, that even that is a story.
Yes, but it's a really tantalizing story.
It's a tantalizing story.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super seductive story. Wouldn't you rather be more of who you are? Unless you're going for, non-self, like no self. I mean, I don't play in the land of no self. Like, we're making a self. We're re-architecting, to use your word, a self. We're curating a self. Yeah.
So becoming more of who you are definitely sounds very seductive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And easier than trying to become something that you're not.
I guess that's pretty common. A lot of people are trying to become something they're not.
It's terrible. We all walk around trying to become something we're not. Like me trying to squeeze into a pair of size 2 jeans, or, I'm not a size 2 jean. Like, and so then I spend my life on a diet trying to be something that I'm not, rather than actually just like living into what I actually am.
And for example, in our case, when you were coaching me, I'm not a CEO.
You're not.
But I have had this orientation for whatever reasons.
To that narrative. To
be a CEO, and that was messing things up.
It was. And then
that's going against the grain?
It just creates too much friction. Wouldn't you rather work with less friction?
I'd rather, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because then it's much more pleasurable.
Right.
Like the process of answering that question, what am I going to do with my life? There should be more pleasure in it than pain.
I guess for me, just this whole idea that I need to be some very successful executive was embedded into me, and I'm not blaming anyone, but that's what I grew up with. That's what
Yeah.
people did, and that was like a hallmark of success was you got the fanciest degree and the fanciest job, and then now you're at the top level somewhere, all of that.
And it's understandable, and it's a great example. Like, if we had followed that path in our coaching, we would have spent a lot of time unpacking that. And that can be really powerful work, unpacking the dynamics behind that for you. But we'd still be unpacking it. And we'd
Instead of...
enhancing who you actually are.
Gotcha.
Right? We'd still be on the other side, analyzing and abstracting and understanding. Again, important things, but not the kind of coaching that I'm interested in helping people with.
And also, that kind of stuff won't produce results as in a new path or a more clear path or a more seductive path.
It'll produce more awareness of the pathology and the programming, so that can be helpful, but it will not produce more actionable steps, and it will not produce necessarily more short-term and long-term enjoyment and fulfillment. When we're aligned with our character and our personality and what we believe that to be, it's just more pleasurable. It's just going to be easier, right? I mean, if you think about it from a neurochemistry perspective, like if you're always pushing the noradrenaline and the cortisol to be something that you're not, that's going to be tighter than just like pushing who you actually are.
So if someone's in the, if someone's in that narrative, like they grew up with, I'm gonna be an engineer, and that's very true for Asian and Indian families, Southeast Asia. That, that there's a running joke that you better be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer.
Yeah.
Right. So you better get your degree and do all of that. That's very impactful for all the people growing up in that culture.
Absolutely.
And so that, and there could be, what you're saying is there could be a lot of unpacking there.
Absolutely.
And what you're saying is this story of who you really are could be different or separate from that.
Yeah, I would say it takes a lot of courage to actually go down a path of living into who you really believe you are. So, and I want to keep adding that word, believe you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the courage it takes to be like, I'm going to actually live into who I believe I am, that's kind of a road less taken. It's in some ways much easier to have a painful experience of becoming the thing that you believe that you're supposed to be because of your culture, rather than getting under that and living into who you actually believe yourself to be.
Would this apply to people in any age group?
I imagine it would. There's slices where it's easier and more difficult. I would say the people that I coach mostly are between their 28-ish, when they've individuated, more completed their individuation from their family of origin, through mid 40s. I've coached people older. It just gets rougher. Yeah.
And so this time mandala thing you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
What is
sand
that?
mandala.
Sand mandala.
Yeah. So I had this incredible experience recently. There's actually 3 of them in the physical world, where we went to this rhododendron farm where this man has worked for 35 years creating hybrids of rhododendrons and raising rhododendrons and everything rhododendron. And it was like he and I were talking about how when he dies, there's no one to pick up, that he's going to leave it to. It will have just literally been like a mandala, sand mandala that the Buddhists create. And that just seems so absolutely poetic and beautiful to be invited into essentially his mandala, a thing that will exist for this short period of time. It's been about 30 years, and then will cease to be. And that's how I feel about like how sacred it is being someone's partner in a coaching contract, because they're actually inviting me into their mandala. Like, I have an inside seat in what it means to be that person, and that will cease to be someday. And so it feels really precious. Yeah.
This is so refreshing and kind of different of a take from a lot of people who are into leaving legacies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of people, including myself, I'll admit, like, yeah, what kind of legacy will I leave?
Yeah.
How will I impact the planet? And,
Yeah.
will they remember me secretly? I don't say that one out loud.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, look, I think for a lot of us who aren't written up in the like history books and like, in media, in the world of media, we will be forgotten within a couple of generations. When I look back at my parents and their relatives, I know those people. My mother's still living, but when she dies, my access to my grandmother's generation and my great-grandmother's generation will be completely erased. There will be no storylines except for actually this pair of candlesticks, which is an interesting story. There'll be they'll be gone. And so I believe that is so about me. And since I didn't have children, I'll probably disappear much more quickly. Like, I will cease to be. And simultaneously have had an impact, because of course we all have an impact on the planet, right? But not necessarily in a grandiose way. I'm really okay with that. I think it's actually poetic, quite beautiful.
And so that maybe also helps with focusing on, who you believe you really are, and taking that route versus whatever you're supposed to be route.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. That's a big developmental leap, I would think, for people. But I love that you're asking the question. I wouldn't assume the people I work with to be able to make that leap necessarily, or have a desire to make that leap. Again, I don't much care if they want to leave a legacy or not. Like, God bless if they want to. Great. If that's what shows up in their belief about themselves, we're going to enhance that. Really, what I find compelling is that I get invited in. Like, I get invited into their belief system about themselves. Like, I get invited into what they create and generate in their experience. Like, that's the part that's super cool. Like, when you talk about living on the boat for 5 years, like, I'm right there with you. And so I have that storyline, and then that coupled with what I understand who you believe yourself to be. I'm like, that's like a delicious slice of humanity that I get invited into and have a front row seat for. Yeah.
And yet at the same time, it's, that was the time of my life when I was living on a boat a few years ago. I was making money here and there, like with gigs, teaching gigs, but it wasn't like a solid job, and it wasn't building my career. But
you were building the mandala of who you believe yourself to be.
Right.
Like, to me, that's deeply embedded in the story of Jaswell.
Yeah, and then there's that nagging feeling. Man, like, if you had just worked on your career, you'd be like so set right now with something.
Right.
Right.
And that's a piece that people unpack a lot in coaching or therapy, will be that angsty piece.
And that angsty piece will be there, right?
Yeah. It's not going to go anywhere, because it's like sort of the harbinger, or like the little memory of the culture. Like, it's going to stick around. It's like I have a master's in change management, and to this day, if you ask my parents, my dad's no longer living, but if you ask my mother what my master's was in, she would say it was an MBA. And that's just like laughable, right? Like, there's like an unconscious thing there. Like, so those things live in us, And like, look, we live in a time where there are certain cultural things that are very, very powerful. Like, would I love to be a millionaire or multimillionaire? Yeah. But I wouldn't really spend it on anything except for my house. But still, like, yeah, that's still, I live in a culture and a time where that's really valued. And so I value it too. But if you look at the motivations and the way I've lived my life, nothing has aligned with that, with having that happen. Right? It's that evidence to the contrary thing. Like, I might say that I want to be a multimillionaire. Literally none of the choices I've made in my life align with that.
And so rather than feel crummy about it,
yeah, I just live into the things that like I actually love and love to explore. Because I know that the other thing is an artifact of culture. Because clearly, if I had wanted it to happen on some level, not like, woo-woo manifestation, but if it had been that important to me, like, I would have attacked that first.
and in some ways then you're, as that realization is coming in, like, okay, well, the evidence in my life points to, for example, in me, like living in a boat, kind of like a gypsy a little bit.
Totally.
And not embedded in a corporate culture.
Totally.
Points to a trail of evidence. So what you're saying is I could double down on that or feel crummy and jump and try to do something else, which is not me.
Totally. Exactly. And that evidence is all belief systems, right? Again, who you believe yourself to be. Like, yeah, let's get more of that. Rather than feeling, crummy about yourself and trying to put yourself into like a straitjacket when that's not your suit to wear. There are enough human beings in the world doing that.
Right. So there's a lot of people who are, for them, they could say it's not working out.
Yeah.
Right. They're in a crummy job situation. It's not like they chose that.
Yeah.
What would you say to them? Like, evidence points to that's what they want.
I would, and actually, I want to just make a sort of a qualifying point. It doesn't mean that one has to like leave the corporate world, right? I have
a job,
because I have a former client who was a massage therapist, had been an engineer, left engineering for massage therapy, and desperately missed engineering, is what it turned out to be as we went through this process, and now has a huge job as a manager for a manufacturing company in engineering. And is happy in that. Fulfilled. It's delicious for this person. Happy. Because it was totally in line with how this person believed themselves to be.
Got it. But they had to go through that detour into
the angsty part and the detour and leaving, and then, right, this whole exploration. That was the process for this particular person. I didn't show up until they were at the end of the massage piece going,
that's not for me.
This is not for me. Yeah.
And they didn't know enough to go back to engineering. It wasn't clear.
No, we had to go through a whole process.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that doesn't mean knowing who you are and the reality of finances and bringing money in. You got to pay the bills somehow.
Absolutely.
You got to take care of your family somehow and pay rent, and it's ridiculous in some places.
Absolutely.
Right, and then there's the potential uncertainty.
Absolutely.
So there's all of that.
Yeah.
And then there is somehow in this narrative, being who you are comes as like it's going to weigh in on that. It's not going to support it necessarily. Like in my world, the way I see life is like the way who you are, you'll have to sacrifice something to be who you are, like sacrifice comfort, predictability, job, stable job, etc.
Not so.
To be who you are.
Yeah, it's not so. Like that's a false belief, I think, that most people hold in the culture. I have a client right now who, it was very clear, given what we learned about his personality, again, I keep saying who he believes himself to be, that him quitting his job and running off and doing something crazy was like not the right response. And so what we did was we actually like leaned more heavily into his current role, where there's a lot of perks, because it's a particular kind of job that has a lot of perks. And we got as much information about those perks so that he could exploit his benefits and have time to explore around the edges of the particular job that provides him with a particular kind of safety that his narrative self needs. So he still has the same job, and he's doing all this around the sidelines and building things that might end up being ultimately more like big extended hobbies, could end up being the work thing. But he's like, he feels alive for the first time in a long time, because he's actually has the safety he needs, and he has tons of paid time off available that he can start using to play with, just to fuel other parts of his personality.
I see. So the false belief that you pointed to earlier is that who I believe I am will take away from the stability and
Exactly.
the goodies,
Doesn't have
and
to.
like it doesn't have to,
No.
but it could.
Well, it could, but it's like, for example, you've like, my experience of you is you've always been much more, like you said, a gypsy or a nomad, and risk taking is easier for you, right? Like I said, I have clients who the risk taking is not easy, and I'm not asking them to become risk takers, because that would be completely go in the other direction of out of alignment with who they are or who they believe themselves to be.
So you're dancing with their beliefs.
Completely.
And this is not like a prescription
No.
that says, oh, I see this, therefore you should do that.
No. We're just enhancing what's already there with the constraints that exist with what's already there.
And if people have problematic beliefs, like, hey, whoever I am is going to mess with my career, therefore I'm going to put that away and I'm going to focus on my career and be miserable. Or I'm going to be who I am and have a crummy, this thing of like, oh man, I'm missing out on, I'm a loser, whatever. That belief system, with a coach's help, I could get a grasp on and say, okay, it doesn't have to be this way.
I'm not sure I understand what you're asking, but there's no black and white prescription for where somebody's going to end up in answering that question.
Mm-hmm.
And answering that question is definitely a process, like probably never-ending process, always changing. But there's no. If we look at sort of developmental movements, we think it is that you leave leave the corporate thing behind and you become like, enlightened. But that's not actually so for everybody. So we're actually working with. It's like cooking. We're working with the ingredients we have on hand. And rather than saying, ugh, I don't like fenugreek, we're like, fenugreek, that's going to go really well with blah, blah, blah. We're just enhancing.
You're not taking away from, oh, okay, you're cooking the wrong thing here.
No. And we're not saying that, you should just like leave everything behind and jump into the unknown. Because for a lot of people, that would be a terrible, terrible thing.
Right. Right. And this is so different from, I can see how this is, because I've taught a lot of classes in the past, and this is very fine-tuned and custom for each person.
Very, very,
as a
very.
coach
Yes.
for you.
Yes.
So it's not like you can have 10,000 people. You can't coach 10,000 people.
No.
What's what's an ideal number?
Like 3 at one time is like puts me at max capacity. I'd rather do 2 at a time.
Wow. So that's a lot of energy.
Ton of energy. You burn a lot of chi. You're holding a lot of space. Different than talking about it in a conversation where it can be more abstracted. I'm entirely focused. I'm drawing connections in the moment. I have to be like a resource library. So I am a bit of a generalist. I know so much about so many different things because I have to be able to point each person in the direction of what's actually going to be suitable to them as far as explorations go. Like the books I'm going to recommend to you are going to be different than the books I recommend to somebody else. And I have to be listening at all of those levels of developmental awareness and character and all of that in order to point people in the right direction.
So being a coach takes a lot.
It's a lot of energy. Yes, it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of care. It takes a lot of time. It's incredibly boutique. Like it's when done right, I think it's incredibly thoughtful and time intensive.
And so it's not like you have a program for someone.
The only program piece I have is that everyone does assessments.
Got it.
And after that, even how we're going to roll with the sessions. Like you and I, at some point, we were meeting twice a week for half an hour.
Yeah.
Like right now, the person I'm working with, we're on a 3-week break in between because there's homework for this person to do. Right, so like the cadence changes. I just know that it's 12 hours, and those 12 hours are going to be used in a unique way that we're going to see as we move through the process.
So you have some basic structure.
Yep.
On like time and availability and your resources, and
exactly.
then you dance with that.
Exactly.
What do you think? I've seen so many, like I see ads on Facebook, how to become a coach.
Yeah.
And there's so much of that. And it felt
Yeah.
like at some point last year during COVID that every other person was becoming a coach.
Everybody's a coach.
So what do you think of that?
I find it a little bit heartbreaking for everybody involved. It's sort of like everybody's a yoga teacher, right? It's like, the question is, what is that trying to fulfill? Like, well, what is that in the larger pattern of the culture that's we're trying to fulfill there? It's interesting and compelling. But it also means that, like yoga, like massage, like any of those things that have been sort of financialized or commoditized, like coaching, it's a wild west, and you don't actually know what you're getting when you're hiring somebody. You don't know their level of awareness. You don't know about their capacity. You don't know about their orientation. Yeah, you just don't know what you're getting. And people who are really good at marketing, or who get into that sort of the funnel, all those click funnel things online, which I don't really know anything about, a lot of them bring in a lot of clients and are very successful, but we don't know if they're good coaches.
What would be the difference between a good coach and a bad coach?
A good coach would be have done their own work, be able to get out of the way of projection, and actually be a clear plate for somebody else's process, and not be projecting their own biases onto that plate. A good coach would be also agile with styles and techniques and tools and tips and skills that they were offering to the client. A good coach is a great listener, but also directive when necessary. Again, ultimately it's really about projection, that they can get out of the way. That it's not about a formula, and it's not about them and their interpretation of reality. And really that just comes with awareness, because there are a ton of coaches who are going to be projecting all over their clients.
And so for a client, like, is there a way to tell
No.
if they're signing up with a good coach or a not so great coach?
No. It totally sucks.
It totally sucks.
I mean, there really isn't. Right? It would take a certain level of awareness on the point of the client or the prospective coachee to be able to recognize somebody who's actually just going to be projecting their value system onto them. And if you're at a certain level of awareness and development, like, you're not going to recognize it. So I think there's no good way.
So there's risk taking.
Tons of risk taking.
Oh man, that sucks.
Totally sucks. Imagine spending $15,000 on a coaching engagement for a year with like one of those high-end click funnel coaches, and it's just sucking.
And there's not much takeaway. Maybe you're excited about it during the program, but your life didn't really alter in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Man, that's a problem to be solved.
Yeah, you want to solve it? I don't know how you solve that. I mean, it's like, how do you know you're going to see a good doctor? Like, how do you know, like anything, right? How do you know it's a good well, I guess a good restaurant you would know.
Yeah. Maybe some references from friends. But again, there's this whole, as you were talking about, a good marketer doesn't equal a good coach. So if you're seeing their material online, or you're seeing like the perfect YouTube little video bites, doesn't mean that they're a good coach. They're just good at those video bites and marketing.
And even a coach who's being paid 6 figures doesn't mean they're a good coach. Yep. Referral seems to be the best way. It's like, if you have a good coach, refer out that coach.
Help your friends.
Yeah.
So if you had a great experience, and you can point to it.
Yeah, but then it means that you have to know that you had a great experience.
That's a tricky one too.
Totally. Yeah, so.
I guess then it's proof's in the pudding, right? Like, if you can point to some evidence, I mean, I don't know, like, I can talk subjectively about how awesome I felt.
Yeah.
But that, I don't know how translatable that is. Versus, someone could point, okay, well.
Yeah.
I was feeling crummy 6 hours a day and anguish about my life.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's 1 hour a day. okay, at least that's something, and I'm
That's
doing
something.
something interesting.
Absolutely. Or I feel more landed and grounded in who I am.
Mhm.
That could be something.
Okay, so actually,
Mm-hmm.
maybe we can, as we meander to a close,
Mm-hmm.
that like, what is it that, what are some of the markers in your experience with your clients and people you coach that it's working? Indicators.
Resolution of some of the existential angst, ultimately.
So they feel, okay, I don't have to worry about
Mm-hmm.
what am I doing with my life, or did I go
Exactly.
wrong? There's less of that.
Less of that. They feel more grounded in who they are and their experience.
And so grounded, as in, there's not that many FOMO moments.
Yeah, FOMO, exactly. That's a great way of just saying it. I was going to say
Fear of missing out.
Exactly. That, and there's not a felt sense of angst. Like the felt sense of angst has really quieted. Like there's a grounded of like, oh, this is, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.
Okay, that feeling, like
Yeah.
I'm where I'm supposed to be versus,
Like,
am I in the wrong place?
exactly.
Missing out on something.
And that's different from it being hard. Like you can still be, I'm in the right place, but it still can be hard.
Right.
Yeah, but that angsty, like clenching gut feeling has settled. Like you feel your feet, you feel your pelvis.
More embodied.
Definitely more embodied. More aware of oneself and one's story and meaning making. It's a little abstract. You're doing what you wanted to do. You're doing something. Like you're actually taking action in the world that's in alignment with something that you care about. So that you feel creative. You feel, I think that's important. You feel creative, and you feel life feels playful.
Playful.
Like just a big field of creativity.
That'd be a great marker. Like if
Mhm.
I'm feeling more playful in the things I'm doing,
Absolutely.
okay, then it worked.
Absolutely. More
Okay.
and more creative, more playful. Yeah. More
Great.
generative. That was the word I was
More
looking for.
generative.
Yep. That'd be a huge positive sign. Yeah. More humor about the self that you believe yourself to be.
Got it. So
Mhm.
and you're less, this is it.
Yeah, like you brought up the story about self-worth, like that story wouldn't become a focal point of attention in the same way,
Got it.
right?
Got
It's
it.
just like emotions transforming form when you meditate. This would be thought forms transforming form.
You can say totally say no to this. Anything else you want to cover?
No, I can't think of anything. I mean, like, I hope I've done a good job of explaining. It's hard to explain in abstraction, but it's really delicious work. Like, I love this work. I love being invited into people's mandalas, as we, described. I love seeing people for who they believe themselves to be, and just enhancing the shit out of that, and like making it loud and bright and beautiful, and true to them, separate and individuated from culture and upbringing. I love that we end up in these places that I couldn't have imagined we'll end up, with people doing things that who knew that that's what they're going to end up doing. I love being able to have a felt experience and a visual experience of a person in their inhabiting their future self. Like it's just beautiful and poetic work. So
It is.
I feel
like the
really blessed to do
mandalas.
it. I love it.
Yeah. Jane, I loved this interview. Thank you so much for spending
thank you
time.
so much.
I had a great time.
Me too. Super
Yeah.
fun.
Let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you.
Goodbye.